Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I hope everyone who lives in the mountains or near the mountains has started getting after it. From the images I've seen, it's not all a single ribbon of death. There's POW out there, and it has me jealous. But I'm only a few weeks away from hitting the summit at Snoqualmie. And while I won't be getting in the mountains as much this season, I'll be going. And if you see me on the hill, I'll be the guy rocking OR gear and Elan skis. I expect a high five. Why? Because you listen to the podcast or you feel bad about my wife who was diagnosed with cancer. And high fives are appreciated and they make me feel good. And now it's time for the cancer update. Today is Friday. At the time I'm recording this intro, I've already been in the hospital for 5 hours for a procedure for my wife, and I'm still waiting. So this means that instead of getting home at noon for a 1 p.m. podcast with Jeremy Jones, Big Mountain Jeremy Jones that is, I'm going to get home at 4, and this podcast may not happen. Now Jeremy has been super accommodating, and I feel like a total douche as I've pressured him to get this thing done this week, and now I'm not available. So if the podcast happens, major props to Jeremy Jones, who has no idea what's going on in my life. But I've left hints, and he's being way too kind with his time, which, if I do my job right, you'll find is really limited. But as important as this podcast is to me, my wife is way more important. So, Jeremy, I really hope we get this done today, but if not, I'll be re-recording this intro to reflect the plan B that I have in place. Regardless, it's going to be a long weekend of keeping my wife comfortable after this third surgery and getting a show ready for Monday. Really, I've been scrambling to get podcast shit done for the past few months. I guess that's understandable, but it really bothers me as I like to be ahead of the game and stress-free all the time when it comes to my work. And I know that's not always possible, but that's how I like to roll. But I'm feeling that once we get through the holidays, I should be back to normal. I'm only telling you this because I share pretty much everything in these intros. And while I know some people don't want to hear about my stuff, and I get it, I will say that the podcast intro is the easiest way to let friends, family, and listeners know what's going on in my life. I've heard from so many people, and I want to thank everyone for their support. It does really mean more than you could ever know. But let's not talk about anything that's a downer right now. Let's talk about my guest this week. Jeremy Jones needs no introduction, really. He's a living legend. Once known for his movie parts that focused on helicopters and sleds, Jeremy Jones is now known for pioneering human-powered travels on his splitboard in the backcountry. He's the founder of Protect Our Winters, the founder of Jones Snowboards, and he's an absolutely leathery mountain man legend. But before we talk to Jeremy Jones, I want to ask you what I always do. Please follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. Please subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast and tell a friend about the show. It really does help things grow. Finally, you know I only work with the best brands in the business, and the best brands are Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Stanley, GoPro, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk with Jeremy Jones. Your nephew is Kai Jones. He is like the future of skiing. When was the first time you got to ride with a kid and thought to yourself, holy shit, this kid is special on snow?
Well, he had a love for the mountains at a very young, at like 2-3 years old. So that was probably the first thing that I noticed was like, wow, he really loves it out there. And then, God, since then, just pretty natural watching him evolve and seeing how much he was out there and always pushing it. And I mean, he's been flipping off of stuff since, I don't know. I mean, he's probably 8 years old, 7 years old. And so it's been this natural evolution and hasn't been that much of a surprise just because I've been there the whole time.
Yeah, and his dad, your brother, Todd Jones, he's famous for what he's created with TGR. And not that you're all up in your brother's business all the time, but was there any pushing of Kai to do that stuff in the mountains? Or was it more like, just get him the gear, he's a Jones and he's born to do this?
Yeah, definitely no pushing of these kids. I mean, stuff Kai's doing, you got to want it from within. It's intense, it's serious, and that certainly comes from the core of Kai's soul.
And when you think about kids, you're one of those once-in-a-generation athletes. You're a badass mountain man, a different breed, really, and your life is full of risks and rewards. Do you want the same for your kids, or do you want them to live a completely different life?
I go back and forth on it. I mean, the kids are going to do what the kids are going to do. So we'll see where that ends up. But yeah, my son and daughter my daughter's up at Boreal right now snowboarding. My son's at the climbing gym. So they certainly have a very similar commitment to snowboarding that I had at their age.
And our kids are way cooler than us, and I think that in general. And sure, you're Jeremy Jones and you may be a legend, but in their eyes, what are the things that you do or say that make them cringe and be like, Dad, you are so lame?
Oh, God. I am low man on the totem pole at the Jones household. So I'd say basically everything makes them cringe. Yeah, I have very little credibility at my house.
But then when you think about your kids, what makes you lose it at them as a dad? Like, what are Jeremy Jones's pet peeves with his kids?
Well, I think like any teen parent, the phone addiction is real. I think in the grand scheme of things, my kids' phone addiction is, quelled by the fact that they love the outdoors and, you can't climb and, swipe
Right.
Snapchat at the same time. And then I'd say basic manners. Those are things that get under my skin.
And then back in one of your movies, there was a clip of your son crying and wondering why you had to go on some adventure. I don't even remember which movie it was. But when you saw things like that when they were younger, did those things bring crazy emotions out in you?
Well, yeah, that was on my way to Alaska for a month. And that was and still is the hardest part of my job is when I say bye to my family for those long trips. And so, yeah, that stuff was gut wrenching. But it also, there's been a level of consistency of dad going off to work in the spring for prolonged periods of time that I think they've also become pretty darn used to.
Okay. And now I'm going to reference your incredible book, The Art of Shralpinism. You mentioned that when you head out to these remote areas to ride heavy lines, you compartmentalize your family. Describe what that means to you.
Well, my family is certainly with me in the mountains, but then there is that point where, say, when you're climbing these lines and you cross that birch run and get into the really steep stuff, that there's no room for any mental baggage. So it becomes hyper focused on just me and the mountain and what the mountain's saying. So I think that that's probably what you're referring to.
While I get that, does it piss off your wife the first time she hears that, what goes on in your brain around this, or does she understand that you need to forget about everything?
My wife, she's not read the book, so she has not heard that line. But no, I think that, she understands, that there's a point where I need to just get really locked into the mountains for that really serious zero mistake snowboarding. It's just so all encompassing and it needs to be.
Yeah, for what you're doing, there can be no mistakes, and I guess they can understand that and realize that dad has to be focused. But when your kids are younger, they've seen the mountains take people and they know what can happen. And when they're asking, Daddy, why do you have to go? Or do you not love us anymore? Or anything like that. Like, how do you answer them when they're 10 years old? Like, what do you say to that kid's face?
Well, when they're 10, I don't tell them that I'm going to crawl up spine walls in remote Alaska. I tell them, don't worry, I'll be back. And now they're teenagers. And we unfortunately lived through this recent passing of Hillary Nelson, who my kids knew. And so I'd say that was probably the first time that it hit so close to home with them at that kind of adult age. My daughter's 17. So they're not naive to it, but I think they probably kind of view it the same as we all do. Like the mountains are serious. We're not fear mongering. Like when you read the Art of Shralpinism, there's a lot of fear mongering out there. Well, it's not in the mountains. You can never overstate the seriousness of the mountains. And I think that's the main thing I try to instill in my kids in the mountains is how serious they are.
Yeah, and you've known so many people to die in the mountains, and it's crazy, and it's sad, and it's reality, and unfortunately it's going to happen again. And I'm sure every death hits hard, and while this might not be a PC thing to ask, which is kind of how I roll a lot of times, do some deaths hit harder than others? Like, what was the toughest loss that you've had to deal with so far in life?
Yeah, we lost a good friend, MC, early on. He was my first really close friend to die in the mountains, so that rocked me. Obviously, Shane really did, especially because I am so close to his wife and daughter, Ayla. When that happened, they kind of ended up moving into our house for a couple weeks. I was in the middle of filming for Deeper, came home for that. And that was the single worst drive I've ever had going to an airport, was leaving my house with Sherry and Ayla mourning for Shane and my infant daughter and my wife to go it was my first foot powered Alaska trip. And I knew that the stakes were incredibly hard, but I'll tell you this recent one, I was at the mountain when Scotty Lapp died, the 16-year-old kid who died in a collision at Alpine. And that was during a contest. And it's just the nature of that ended up where my wife and I were kind of in the team room with the kids. And my wife had to break that to these kids. And yeah, that's still just to see a young kid taken like that. And then the effect that it had, of course, on those kids. That's one of the hardest things I've had the mountains take from me.
For sure. I saw those kids at the McConkey this year, and you could see them all wearing like the glasses Scotty would wear. And you could tell that they were all really hurt, but just the love that they had for him. So yeah, that was a huge loss as well. And it's tough to see a kid go for sure. But not everyone dies. Close calls are part of the game, and there's avalanches, injury, all kinds of things can happen in the backcountry. And when you have a close call, but you make it and you come back to civilization, are you riddled with guilt?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I treat those close calls like a death. So it's completely humiliating. And the hard part is there's a big gap in between like the really close calls that I've had in the mountains. So one would think I'd be like, all right, close call, change my program. I'm doing good now. I don't make decisions like that. Haven't had a close call for a long time. And then boom, the earth shakes and you're back at, where someone should have died or could have died. And it's incredibly humiliating.
Do you get complacent when it's been so long that like you just feel like everything's right and then it's all taken away from you, or it's all something happens and then you realize you're back at step one and you're very cautious for another couple of years and then you get complacent again?
Well, I think that what you see in Art of Shralpinism is I've instilled protocol and mindset into my snowboarding to do everything to not get complacent. So no, I do not feel like I'm complacent, and if anything, more on my toes than I've ever been in the mountains.
And with your close calls, do you ever share these experiences with your wife, or is some things better left unsaid?
I definitely have left many things unsaid with my wife, but that has changed. My perspective has changed on that. Because in the past, I would say, all right, let's not talk about this. I don't want my wife to know that there was a close call in the mountains. That's not going to help the situation. And then with that comes ridicule. But I've really changed that approach to, I think it's super important. If something happens in the mountains, there's an avalanche or what, especially if it has to do with snowpack or cornice fall or avalanche or anything in that nature, that it's really important to break down that situation, get that information to the Avi site, get online and tell the community. And I think as a community, we need to get past this shaming armchair quarterback bullshit and really commend people who share their close calls. Because, that's the most important information that can be shared during these avalanche cycles and can certainly save other people's lives.
Yeah, it's about educating people, and that's one way to do it. And in talking about your kids being scared about you going out there or whatever, has there ever been an ask from your wife to reel it back, or is it pretty much understood that you were born to do this and she's no Giselle?
Well, there's a lot in that, but so no, I think that she is totally accept. And the reality is, that's the problem with the mountains is it's not that I can say, you know what, I'm going to stop doing really gnarly stuff. I'm just going to go ride low angle POW and enjoy that the rest of my life. The problem with that is some of the most dangerous things that I've had happen in the mountains is in moderate terrain. And so then you got to ask yourself, so do I not go into the mountains at all? And again, I think so much of what in Art of Shralpinism is this protocol of like, how do you avoid getting in those tricky situations? And so there's a lot of talk about deep slab instability in the book. The way I deal with deep slab instability is avoidance. And so that's just a personal protocol. And I'll sometimes be out there with people that will try to tiptoe around it and work around it. And it's just like, I've crossed that aspect and elevation off the table because there's deep slab instability there. And I do it before I even get into the mountains. So I try to do everything I can to avoid putting myself in a tricky situation well before it might even happen. And it's amazing. The example of crossing terrain off the table, it's wild how it's like, wow, every avalanche this cycle has happened between 7,000 and 8,000 feet on northeast aspects. There's a weird layer there. Let's just stay away from that. And everyone agrees. We walk into the mountains. What do you know? There's this gorgeous northeast aspect, 7,000 to 8,000 feet. And next thing you know, you're trying to talk yourself into it. And I'm already out on that aspect. So it's just little things like that can really, stack the deck in your favor.
Just hard decisions before you even go out there. We know this. We're not going to do that because of what we know already.
Exactly.
This pretty much proves that you have a riskier job than most people in the world. And we've been talking about your family as well. And do you guys also do normal family stuff? Like, are there any Disney vacations or beach vacations for the Joneses?
We love the beach. Why I live in California is so I have access to get to the beach in a couple hours. So that's a big part of it. We're big gamers, whether it's chess, card games, Catan, you name it. We love all games. I've been a fan of pickleball for a really long time.
Sport's blowing up.
The sport's blowing up, but yeah, any and all games, ping pong, foosball, you name it. You come to my house, we're playing games.
And nowadays, more than ever, you're spending more time near your house than at your house because you're not traveling as much, it seems like. That means you probably have more time than ever. And a big focus of this podcast is going to be about time because your time is very limited. And I'm going to guess that regardless of where you are in life, it always feels like life never ends or never even slows down for you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I have a lot with Protect Our Winters, Jones Snowboards, really prioritizing being around with my kids, continue to be a devout member of the Church of the 7-Day Recreationalist. So I love getting outside every day. I definitely am juggling a lot of different things, but all things that I really enjoy.
And I would say this is part of a problem that you personally create. I mean, this year you focused on creating media, and your new book, which we've talked about, The Art of Shralpinism, it's mandatory reading for any skier or snowboarder, especially anybody that heads out in the backcountry. Between all the words and illustrations, which I believe you all did yourself, which is incredible, the thing's really a work of beauty. And people are going to be buying it for the next 20 years. But based on a 60-hour work week, what percentage of your time does the book take in 2022?
Well, the book, it was a kind of multiple drafts type deal. So the ball would be in my court, and then I would get up early and write for 2 hours a day and try to do that for a month and a half. And then I'd hand it off to editors. My neighbor, Chris Crossan, he helped bring my thoughts into a more organized manner. And so it was kind of like repeating that process multiple times. The journal stuff and the art stuff, I've been doing that really my whole life. I never planned on sharing any of it, but the people at Mountaineers Books really wanted to bring some of my art into the book. And then I saw they were laying it up and I was, at peace with it.
Are you stoked? I mean, it came out really great in my opinion.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really happy with the outcome. I mean, at times I was really overwhelmed, but that's also part of that creative process. And that's something that I've always tried to prioritize is anything creative. I love being in moments in life where you're like, I've never done this before. You don't get that excitement without the nervousness. So there's definitely nervous. And also I felt like it's a very honest take on things and just be at peace with like, maybe there's something in there that, the head of the Abbey Center might not like or so-and-so or what have you. But it's like, this is what's in the journals. This is who I am. And yeah, here we go.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start out with Elon Skis. And I'm in love with both my Ripstick 106 Black Edition and the 96 Black Edition. They are so fun and lively, all while remaining light and stable. And I'm not the only person who thinks these ski better than the competition. Both of these skis were named Editor's Picks in Free Skier magazine tests. So the pros out there, the testers, everyone who's actually getting on these skis, they know they're the best skis. I'm telling you they're amazing too. You're going to feel the difference because great product is why Elan is building a cult following in the US. But what's really amazing about the brand is that they built a solar power plant on top of their state-of-the-art factory. And their independence from fossil fuels, along with that new solar plant, will provide a carbon sink as powerful as 15,000 trees on an annual basis. They're putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to the planet. So to find out about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Next up is Outdoor Research. They've been building award-winning outerwear and gear in Seattle since 1981. For 40 years, badasses in the mountains have trusted OR gear to be the best, and they still are. But when you head over to outdoorresearch.com these days to see their new line of product, you're going to notice some major differences. While OR still makes that badass technical gear you've come to trust, they've branched out and hired new cutting-edge designers who have their fingers on the pulse to create new fits, cuts, styles, and colorways that are still functional, but now styled to look great at the resort, in the park, in the backcountry, at the bar, or even a night on the town. And there really is so much new stuff to check out from OR. It's not just outerwear. I'm stoked because everything looks so good that I'm about to have a full OR wardrobe. And you could have the same thing too once you head on over to outdoorresearch.com and check out all the new cuts, all the new fits, all the new outerwear. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. I know I was, and that's why I went with Outdoor Research, and I want you to go with Outdoor Research too. My final sponsor this round is GoPro. And if you aren't using a GoPro for your POV footage, well, you're blowing it, and I'm guessing you already know this. Everyone should have one. But if you don't want the full-sized Hero 11, GoPro has a solution for you. You're going to get the same incredible video performance of the Hero 11 Black in a smaller, lighter, and simpler design with the GoPro 11 Hero Black Mini. And this little guy features new mounting options, including the more low-profile mounting setup that folks have been asking for, a revolutionary 8x7 sensor that's built for the best social media sharing, and the Emmy award-winning Hypersmooth 5.0 stabilization, which has turned my once so shaky it made you sick filming style into footage of beauty. And your footage will be beautiful too. To find out more about the Hero 11 Black Mini and all things GoPro, head on over to GoPro.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. Yeah, I mean, I think there was one part in the book where it kind of said like, yeah, you can take all the Avi courses that you want and they're great for you, but nothing compares to time in the mountains with a mentor. Like that's where you learn the most. And I could see some people being like, well, you can't just say going with a mentor is going to teach you. The Avi classes are important too, but I mean, that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, I say it really clear. Formal avalanche education is very important. This is not a replacement for that. But I do think that it brings up a lot of points that I hope to see in Avi courses where we get caught up in the really fine tactical stuff. And the reality is that stuff is super important, but it's also, I think it's really important, you know, when something happens in the mountains, we get so hyper focused on what that mistake was made, and it's understandable, but it's equally important to understand what led to these smart people making that mistake. And that's something that has always interested me because my mistakes, and I look back on them and I never take them lightly. And it's like, what led to me making that bad call? And so there's so much on the mental game, on mindset, on framing, just little things like when I go into the mountains, I never say, all right, we're going to go climb the Grand Teton. It's like, we're going to go start up the Grand, and we're going to start. And if we can turn these 20 no's into 20 yeses, then that'll be amazing. And when we get to 19, we finally get that last yes. It's like, I cannot believe the mountains just opened their arms for us like that.
Right. All that stuff's in the book and there's so much knowledge in there. And when you're working on a huge project like this, it takes a lot of time, but that's only one of the things that you're doing. And there's so many people that want to slice your time, like me with this podcast. And are all these media requests flattering or frustrating for you?
No, I mean, they're definitely not frustrating. I mean, it's a busy time with the launch of a project, and the book is not much different than, say, bringing a film to the world. But no, I'm honored on the attention. and that people still value my opinion on what I'm doing.
How do you deal with all the comms that come in? I mean, the texts, the calls, the emails. Like if you look at your phone, how many unread emails and texts does your phone show right now?
Well, let me just pull that up since I have it. Well, I have 77,000 unread emails. I'm maxed out on the text at $9.99. So apologies to anyone that didn't hear back from me. I've prioritized making sure that I get back to my mother and my father and my family and the key people I work with. And the reality is, it is a juggle. And I think about it depending on what time of year it is. I have to let certain balls hit the ground. And then there's certain balls I'll get super focused on. Otherwise, it's just like you never get anything done. And for me, it's like prioritizing the creative process. I mean, for example, all these journals that we barely scratch the surface on, or the art and stuff, like I do that for myself. And it's my dad's a really good artist. And he always said, art's about getting on the other side of your brain and letting it take you for a ride. So the outcome's irrelevant. It's about the process. And that's how I've always viewed my writing and my art. And then, it wasn't until this book came along that I ever considered sharing any of it.
And another thing that you're doing a lot of sharing with is the reason that you're on this podcast, because given you were the first guest ever on the Powell Movement, and I'm sure you've done a shit ton of podcasts since then.
Holy shit, dude. That's exciting. Well, I'm honored.
Yeah, you're the first one ever. And I thought about all these different people, and I'm like, Jeremy Jones is the guy I want to be first, which is funny because it's more of a ski-based podcast than a snowboard-based podcast. But you're on this podcast again because you're doing a speaker series. I think you were just up here in Washington, and I didn't find out about it till later, but we have to talk about the speaker series because they're the ones who set this up. What is that all about?
So this is the Alpenglow Speaker Series?
Exactly.
Yeah, so the Alpenglow Speaker Series, I've been kind of safe to say I've been around the world and done many speaking events, movie events, all sorts of different events. And I consider the Alpenglow Speaker Series the best of the best speaker series. The guests are awesome, but it's really the community that comes out to celebrate the mountains. And so it's a huge honor to be a part of it. And it's wow, because I've spoken in Congress, on Capitol Hill, and on the Senate floor, and so on and so forth. But, the Alpenglow Speaker Series, it's like those are big shoes to fill if you think of all the amazing people who've been in there. And then that room, it's just such an energized room that I'm, again, excited and nervous. You don't get one without the other.
When you do that, you have a lot of connected people that are looking for you and want that inside information, and you're speaking to them, which is awesome. But when you look at your professional life these days, then I'm basing these all on a 60-hour work week because I don't think you work 40 hours. I would think that you need many more hours in your week. But how many hours are spent talking to media outlets and just the public about Jeremy Jones? I mean, in an average week, spending like 4 hours a week talking about yourself?
Well, I prefer to spend much more than 4 hours a week talking about myself. But, generally, I say that's 4 hours a day. No, when a project like this comes out, then there's more podcasts and interviews. But I would say I've done probably 10 interviews around the book so far, and maybe it will be 15, maybe 20 when it's all said and done. But that's just been kind of a natural thing. And again, I'm honored to have the opportunity, and it's just been kind of part of my life for a really long time. And so the book, again, it's not a film, but kind of the process or the rollout and the interviews and stuff is similar.
Okay. And then Protect Our Winters is another thing you do. You started that in 2007. This is a time when your carbon footprint was huge. You had like 5 video parts out in a year, which is a career for some people. And those come with a lot of heli and sled time. And while one man's behavior isn't going to make a huge difference when it comes to climate change, what made you switch the way you were doing things? Was it like, well, it's got to start with someone and it might as well be me? Or was it more that you started seeing signs in the wild and you were almost disgusted with your personal contribution?
As far as going towards like this foot-powered snowboarding, that was a combination of things. I'd say equal parts of like wow, there's boundaries where you can take a machine. As someone who like loves to get out and kind of ride new lines, I realized I'm like, if I can figure out how to live out here and hike these lines, I will have 95% more of the world's lines to choose from. I realized I've always viewed the snowboard as a tool to connect with nature. And then once I started kind of meeting nature more on its terms, where I'm starting at the bottom and working my way up these mountains, that was incredible. The other thing is these mountains, they're so beautiful and unique to find that perfect line and good snow and to actually be on the face for hours working your way up and learning its nuances. It's just like the high was just at such a, and the depth was at such a different level. And then, of course, I was seeing changes to the mountains, which led to starting Protect Our Winters, and then started to understand my carbon footprint more. And that coincided with it for sure. But the reality is if I was out there hiking around, sleeping in the tent and doing all that stuff that goes into climbing these mountains, and I was only doing it because of, say, my carbon footprint, I'd be at the beach by now because it's a lot of work. You got to love it.
I can imagine. And when you start Protect Our Winters, McConkey was still alive. And while it was all water bottles and light bulbs and stuff like that compared to how you're influencing policy today, you two were friends and he seemed to be on that same wavelength. Did Shane have any input or a role with Protect Our Winters?
Shane absolutely did. And also, I remember vividly starting Jones and talking to Shane about it. With both of those, I just, had this idea, mentioned it to him about POW. He's like, of course, you should do it. And then it was like a year later, the Jones thing started. And Shane and I would always talk business. We were at a very similar spot in life with a daughter, similar age. He was a little bit older. And then, I talked to him a lot about Jones, and he was like, you'd be an idiot not to start Jones, which was contrast to what, say, some other people I would go to for business advice, it's during the economic downturn, and they were like, just take the money and, do not walk away from snowboard contracts right now.
Right. We're going to talk more about Jones, but I'm going to talk about Protect Our Winters for a little bit first. And with Shane, he had so much going on. Like, he created the IFSA, and with them, it was like he was involved in the beginning, but then he had to pass it off because he just didn't have enough time to do anything. And is that kind of how your role with Protect Our Winters is? Like, in the beginning, you're super involved, and now there's just bits and pieces where you kind of poke your head in, because it seems like you guys have like 25 different people that are working with the organization. You guys have grown significantly. Do they still need all your time, or are you more just the face guy?
Yeah, we have amazing people to wake up every day and focus on climate change. And I can't put that amount of time into it, but what I can do is I am in the mountains all the time. And the issue is so deep in my soul that I give it a ton of thought, and more from a 30,000 foot level of like, how do we unite the outdoor state around climate action? So it's been really helpful to have these people that are kind of doing it day in and day out, and then me who can like think a little bit broader. And so when it comes to like the direction of POW and the overall thinking and things of that nature, I'm very involved. But the nuanced day in and day out stuff, no, there's really good people dealing with that stuff. And I am far from micromanaging any of that.
And yeah, like we said, there's like 25 people there. And I would think with benefits and bonuses, that's a serious payroll. And you also have to pay to fund all of your programs. So in thinking of 25 people that are getting salaries and bonuses, and then all of the programs that you have, what does an operating budget look like for a year with POW? Are you able to say that, or is that off limits?
I mean, it's a nonprofit, so everything out there is public information. But I can't speak to the details of that. I can say we are a bunch of little butterflies fighting the massive dragon of the fossil fuel industry. And I can tell you there's significantly more people and hundreds of millions of dollars more spent on disinformation on climate from the fossil fuel industry than the amount of people and money spent by Protect Our Winters. And
oh, I can imagine. I mean, when you go on these trips to Washington or wherever you're going to influence politicians, Does it ever feel like the politicians are meeting you as a courtesy, but until you have the dollars to really influence them, they're always going to vote with the money?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is there's gatekeepers to get to the actual elected official. And the reality is we see time and again that those doors do fly open and we have really good access with our elected officials. And I think that is because, one, they know it's a serious issue. Two, they know that we do carry influence in the states that we work in because we specifically target these states with a strong outdoor economy. We specifically target Republicans, mostly kind of moderate Republicans that we hope can take a good vote on climate. And the reality is, I think, they want to be pro climate. The majority of them, their biggest donator is the fossil fuel industry. So they're kind of in a tricky spot. And that's kind of the fight we're fighting there right now.
And at this point in life, do people accept you as an agent for change? Or is it more like they're kind of looking at you like, stay in your lane, dude, you're a snowboarder?
I get both of that pretty consistently.
How do you react to it?
I mean, look, my intentions are pure. They're backed by science, fighting for clean air, clean water, and I am not the devil. I'm sorry that you don't agree with where I'm coming from, but again, my intentions are pure and they're backed by science. So that's how I react to it.
And, with a lot of things in this country, we almost are the devil. When I say we, I mean old white dudes are the problem, I feel like, with so many things in this country, and they're in control right now. Do you think things are going to change a lot when we die off, or will it be too late by then for the environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think waiting for old white guys to die is not necessarily the most effective plan, but we had a really good voter turnout from the 18 to 29-year-olds, so that's super encouraging. Traditionally, they would get outvoted by the over 70 crowd, like 5-1. And so I think that there are reasons for optimism, but we know this whole divisiveness that we see in politics that unfortunately is probably going to continue to grow. The fact that climate action is a political issue, that was a concerted effort by the fossil fuel industry, and it's really unfortunate. But, we keep our head down at POW and try to continue to mobilize and unite the outdoor industry and the outdoor state.
It's time for my second sponsor break, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports has been getting people out into the mountains since 1960. And before the internet took off, Peter Glenn prided themselves on being the best in retail, offering the most knowledge and the best service. They still have that, but not everyone can get to one of their retail locations. But there's always the internet, and the Peter Glenn shopping experience is what you want from a website. Smooth, easy to navigate, and full of information. And peterglenn.com has all the brands, all the products, and they always have a deal going on. If that's not enough, they offer free shipping on orders of $49 or more, a no-hassle return policy, and they price match any reputable shop on the web. So please support the brand that supports me, and check out Peter Glenn Ski and Sports before you buy from someone else. My next sponsor is Stanley, another iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. While we all know Stanley for creating that iconic green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, they still do that and a whole lot more these days. And they have always been the right choice when it comes to the planet. If you are still using single-use plastics for your beverages, it's time to make a change for the environment and get yourself a Stanley water bottle for starters. I'm making it easier than ever to do so. You'll save 30% on all Stanley products when you head on over to stanley1913.com, buy some stuff, and I highly recommend a water bottle and a set of their pint glasses, which I use every single day. And when you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST. That's all one word, all lowercase, no spaces, so that's all one word. That's what that means. And you're done. Spend over $75 and you'll get a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. Last but not least is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing my favorite Northwest beer since 2006, and since they started brewing beer, they've been supporting the sports we love. If you aren't sure about what they've done in action sports, I'll tell you. They're the first beer brand to produce their own ski and snowboard movie. They support a team of A-list athletes, and they have signature beers that donate to causes like Protect Our Winners. And they're part of some of the most important events and properties in action sports. So, they've done a lot, and the next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel and support the beer that supports action sports. To find out more about the beers, the pubs, and events, head on over to 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. When we first podcasted, POW was about to be set back 10 years. Trump came into power and pretty much said, fuck the planet, we want profits. Fast forward today, and that Inflation Act passed. I probably have the act wrong, but whatever. While I love to say that I know all about it, it just sounds like inflation to me, but I know it's a huge win for the planet. And I did hear that an Alterra resort, Snowshoe Mountain, had a big influence on making this thing pass. Is there any truth to this? And does that make the Icon Pass better than the Epic Pass?
Well, there's a lot in there. Yeah, so the Inflation Reduction Act is not the greatest name. At POW, we call it the BFD bill, the big fucking deal. There is absolutely truth to Snowshoe Mountain. I mean, it's tough to say, but there was a letter handed to Manchin's office explaining that Snowshoe Mountain is, I believe, the biggest employer in the state, one of the biggest tax revenue generators in the state, and gave him a letter, which at POW has been our stance with all this, is like, this is a jobs issue. And shortly thereafter, Manchin changed his vote. Who knows what role that letter played, but we like to think that it had some role to play.
All right, so an Alterra resort making a big difference in the planet and the world and the country. It's amazing.
Hold on, because you're right, and it's a really big deal, because the reality is the ski industry, they've been really silent when we try to get them to be vocal and use their power to get elected officials that act in the long-term viability of their industry. And an example of that would be where I live in Lake Tahoe, where we just, elected yet again a climate denying politician who votes against climate every chance he has. And his biggest economic driver in the district is the 8 or 9 ski areas. And he has zero fear of just continuing voting against their long-term health of those industries, because those industries sit on their hands and do not utilize their power. So hopefully we continue to see that change.
I mean, I feel like the ski resorts feel like, yes, we can use our power to influence politicians, or we can get $40 out of our consumers for parking. Let's just take the $40 for parking and fuck the planet.
Yeah, and then I just got to say, with this Inflation Reduction Act, we are over the moon over this thing, the BFD bill, because we're seeing already the implications of that. Just in the couple weeks following the passing, there was already $28 billion announced in new clean tech manufacturing infrastructure brought in the U.S. for thousands upon thousands of jobs. When it first came out, they thought it would lead to about 360 some odd billion in this clean tech transition. Now they look at that number as more like 1.7 trillion. So we have this huge, exciting transition that is coming down the pipe, but we need support at every level of government, because the new front lines will be it's one thing, say, getting a solar array pass. It's another getting it passed through, say, at the county level. So yeah, we have a huge opportunity, but we got to continue to lean into it.
It's amazing how many different directions your brain has to go with the life that you lead. And we're talking about POW right now. And while I've been trying to base it all on your time and based on a 60-hour work week, how much time in a month is dedicated to politics and POW, we don't have to answer that, because that really hasn't been working. But I'm going to talk about the rest of the things that you're doing. So you have the Jones Snowboard brand. When you launched it, you were able to go from idea to like 4 boards in 3 months. You could turn on a dime. Now you play in 5 categories. You have enough SKUs to make your head spin. And I would think it takes a huge, huge team. How many people are with the brand these days?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, we're probably internally 25, 30 people, global internal offices, because we are a global company.
Yeah, and then you have subsidiaries everywhere else, or are you guys all connected and they're all part of Jones?
Well, we have kind of the traditional like distributor sales rep program.
Perfect.
We're in 35 countries around the world.
All of these products have your name on them, which is a scary thing, because if something comes out and it sucks, that's like, your name sucks. Do you give final approval on everything?
I do, for sure. I mean, your 60-hour work week only has validity to it if you consider the 30 to 40 hours of that is on snow.
That was going to be my last part that I asked.
So, yeah, I'm on snow a ton. I love the product creation. It's like so in our DNA. And I say that in the sense of there's no timeline when we're developing stuff. Like, we're just always tinkering on stuff. And then I have friends that I hand off product. Maybe someone's like really harder on equipment. I'll give them that board, or has a different style of riding. I give them that, or what have you. So yeah, we're in the mountains a ton and always tinkering with different product.
When you created the brand, you created the products that you needed to thrive in the mountains. And you become the first brand that people think of when they think of backcountry snowboarding and splitboarding. But it's a passion project, I would think, when it starts. That it's going to grow into a big business. But are you getting rich off this? I mean, is it a serious cash cow?
No, I mean, I wish I could say that it is. But, we just launched outerwear. Before we even got to market, that was 4 years. So I guess in the nature in which we develop stuff, so that's 4 years of staff before a piece of product lands on a shop floor. So things like that quickly, diminish what would be potential profits.
But there has to be a little bit of money that you're able to play with, I would hope. And in thinking of that, what kind of toys does Jeremy Jones buy for himself that aren't snow related?
There's a quote in the book: he chose to be rich by making his wants few and supplying them himself. I like to bike and surf, but again, if I look at my surfboards, one, I work with Chris Christensen, so he's been kind enough to give me some boards, but I haven't had a new surfboard in probably 3 years. And so I don't know. Really, for me, what I fight for is just getting outside. And in the summer, that might be backpacking. Obviously, in the winter, it's snow. But my fight is for like disconnected time outdoors, or I love getting up early and writing or painting before anyone's up. Things of that nature is where I get my most joy.
I would have never have guessed that you would wake up early before everybody else and paint. But that's why I do this podcast. And really, what you are is a snowboarder and one of the best to ever do it, a living legend in the mountains. And you said I was going to ask you all about how often that you're going and how much time is spent in the mountains, but it sounds like 30 hours a week is pretty much a normal week for you on the hill or in the backcountry.
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, I'm on snow. I mean, it will be common for me to ride 10 days in a row. So probably 28 out of 30 days a month is common. As I talk about in the book, playing the season, I like to really stack days on snow. December, January, even February, and then March and April is less days, and I'm more in bigger mountains and really waiting for those windows to open up where we're going to go and do some monster mission.
All right. So basically what we've established is that on paper, your life is really, really busy, but you're able to get out and snowboard as much as you possibly can every year, which is amazing. But I'm about to give you your time back because this podcast is pretty much almost over. We have to get through one thing that I call inappropriate questions. And I didn't have these when we first did our podcast, when you were the first guest on this podcast. But this is a segment where I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And this week I was able to get the best yoga instructor in Palisades and in California, really, Sherry McConkey, to ask the questions. And then you get a special bonus question from someone that Sherry will let you know. So are you ready for question number 1 from Miss Sherry McConkey?
Yes. Best voice around.
Oh, did she tell you that she used to do phone sex?
She has not spilled that to me, but I can see that.
Well, she did. She went to a telephone operator job once when she was in South Africa, or she was traveling when she was younger, because I podcasted with her. And she got down, they put her on a phone, and that was what the line was like a phone sex line. And I think she quit that day. So she's got a great voice. I don't think she actually did phone sex, but she was hired to do it and quit. So we'll go with question number 1 from Sherry.
You are known in the world as a badass in the mountain. Based on your reputation, are people who have ever seen you in person surprised by your small stature? What is the weirdest comment you have ever received?
All right. I like that question.
Okay. Are people surprised by my small stature?
Well, because you just think Jeremy Jones is this badass motherfucker, and he's probably 6'3", 250, and he's just going to work everything in the mountains, but that's not you.
Yeah, I definitely get the, thought you'd be taller.
Dalton got that in Roadhouse too.
The other one I get on that is with people in the mountains. I've been spending time with Griffin Post more the last couple of years. And one of our first long trips, he turns to me and says, kind of looser than I thought.
That's pretty funny. We are going to jump into question number 2.
What is it like for you and your kids to wear Jones from top to toe on every item of clothing and snowboards?
Yeah, it's a little bit egomaniacal. How would you say it?
I liked it. Egomaniacal.
It's egomaniacal. I get it. Yeah, I'm a walking billboard, guilty. But it's wild. It's like totally separate from my thought of that. It's just like it's this brand. It obviously has my name on it, but I definitely don't be like, wow, that's so incredible that my kids have Jones written all over them.
All right, we're going to go for Sherry's last question, and then you get a bonus question.
Okay.
They say that behind every powerful and successful man is a strong woman. How does it feel to know that you are just the popular, athletic, and pretty face when it's really your amazing wife, Tiffany, that is the supermom and true talent of Jones and Powell?
That is a very accurate description. So yes, it feels like, again, I'm low man on the totem pole at my house because my wife is really the one who deserves the kudos.
All right, so some points there for you. Hopefully, if she listens to this, but she might not. She hasn't read your books. She might not listen to your podcast. But your final inappropriate question is coming right now, and I think she says it's who it's from. But if she doesn't say who it's from, I'll let you know.
Well, let's go to JT Holmes' inappropriate question. And here we go. You are a notorious abuser of the auto reply. When people email you and they receive the auto response that you're away in a remote location on an expedition, how often is that true? And how often is it that you're just trying to dodge your work commitments to surf or waste days away in the hills with your friends and family? I can think of a dozen times where I got one of those emails. Then you at the bus stop dropping off the kids and heading out for a fun day off the leash.
Calling you out.
So, yes, I'm a huge fan of the auto reply, and I like to make a point of 2 points in it. Is one, do not take lack of communication personal. It's amazing how often I'll run into someone who's like, I emailed you and you did not get back to me. I am so mad. And it's like, dude, just calm down. I'm just trying to keep in touch with my parents and my wife and my kids. And then the other is like, I don't go back. I make a point and say, email me upon my return, because I'm not going to go and get back from this long trip and start sifting through emails. I just start fresh. And that's one of those things where I had to come to terms with is what I call email bankruptcy, because it got to a point where I was like, well, I could have a email inbox that's like looking totally clean and get nothing done and never go snowboarding, or I can just accept that I'm going to miss a lot of emails. And what JT's talking about is I'll put one out for a trip and I'll purposely leave it on longer because I'm not ready to get back into email world.
I can totally see doing that. And that's Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And over the years, you've gone from Hellion sled Jeremy Jones to human powered Jeremy Jones, and you've gone further, deeper, and higher than any snowboard on the planet. And we didn't talk about any of that stuff because every year there seems to be something new and interesting to talk about. But really, I think myself and my audience, we get to know you better with this style of interview. And if anybody wants to get your backstory, well, they can listen to the hundreds of interviews that you've done. They can get your book, The Art of Shralpinism, that'll give a great backstory. And it's available here on podcast number 1 on the Powell movement. And it's cool to reconnect and talk about Jeremy Jones that we didn't talk about before. And I will really appreciate you being flexible, and I thank you for your time.
Always an honor, Mike. Thank you. And so impressed with everything you built. And I'm glad I was able to help kick it off.
So that was time with Jeremy Jones, and I'm really surprised we were able to make this thing happen. Jeremy was traveling, then he was sick, then he was going on another trip, and I had a tiny window for him, and he made it happen. Just another reason why Jeremy Jones is such a badass in my book. And my whole goal with this episode was to find out about Jeremy's time, or lack thereof, by asking about life based on a 60-hour week. That concept failed miserably, but I still think I found out the info I wanted to about his time. You know, he has none. Also, I don't know if you heard it or noticed it, but Jeremy laughed like 6 times during our chat, and for some reason, I don't think about laughter when I think of Jeremy Jones. But that's me, and he probably laughs all the time, but I just imagine Jeremy stoic looking up at big peaks all the time in a serious manner because he's Jeremy fucking Jones. That's the podcast for this week, which almost didn't happen. And you know, I hear this all the time from guests and I say it myself, but if you're persistent and you work really hard, things will come together. And while this one didn't come together until the 11th hour, I deliver again, and I hope you like it. Thanks for listening. And for those of you who want to know what happened with our doctor's appointment, well, Ange went in for a second abscess to be drained with a needle and have her drain checked and hopefully removed. The drain has been one of the most painful parts so far, and when it's removed, she can get back to normal life, with cancer. So, the process is supposed to be quick and not too painful, and we ended up driving to a hospital an hour out of town so we could get this thing done sooner. And Ange was like, "Can I get something for the pain before we start this? I have a long drive ahead of me." So they're like, "Yeah, we can give you something for pain, although this shouldn't hurt that much," and they gave her something. And they start to pull out the tube and drain. But something was wrong, and Anne started screaming in pain like she hadn't before, but I wasn't there, so I didn't get to see any of this. She called it the worst pain of the whole ordeal, and they had to put her under to remove the drain. When she comes to, they were like, "There was a wire that was part of the drain, and we've never seen anything like this, but it got caught inside you." So it was like a fish hook ripping at her insides. But that was quick, focused pain, and it didn't last or linger, and I'm lucky as I didn't have to see any of it, which makes things way easier for me, because watching her in pain is really some of the worst parts of this whole process. But I didn't have to see it that time, so I'm going to pretend like it didn't happen, although I know it did. But now that that drain is out, Ange is feeling better than she has in a month. Finally, it's a win for her, it's a win for us, and that's the update. At this point, I want to ask you to leave a review on iTunes or social media, tag me in it, and if I read it on the show, I'll send you a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. But I'll only do that if you email me with your address at mike@thepowellmovement.com. And anyone can email me there with your questions, concerns, guest suggestions, whatever. There's a great chance I'll get back to you, but know that some things have been falling through the cracks lately, but hopefully not your email. Finally, please support my sponsors who make this thing happen. They're Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Stanley, GoPro, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.